Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a very quick look here at Doom the Dark Ages on the RTX 5090, and specifically what we're going to be looking at is the new path tracing update that has finally hit. We're using the MSI Gaming X Trio version of the card. It's an OC model, 32GB of GDDR7 video memory, obviously the most powerful GPU on the market, and one that is actually specifically tailored to path tracing in that use case. We're not overclocking, and we're pairing with the 9800X 3D as well as 64GB of DDR5. So essentially the top of the line setup that you could really even possibly throw at a game like this. Now, when we look at path tracing, which I will in a moment, I'm going to just look at it from the perspective of you're already at max settings and you want more. I think that, if you're not getting a playable frame rate at max settings, I would probably just set path tracing aside personally, maybe go for, Benchmark King's optimal settings for showcase in a few videos. But for now, what I really just want to take a look at is just to get a baseline here. We're just going to start off with our max ultra nightmare settings at native here. Now for native, we'll just use TAA for our native resolution with 100% resolution scale, which you can see right here showing that our resolution scaling is turned off. Now I did have a video, which I will link here, where I kind of went through and played some games on the 5090 at max 4K resolution with no upscaling, just to show that, honestly, a lot of games actually don't really perform very well at native resolution 4K, even on a 5090. However, as we go ahead and begin counting here, you can see Doom the Dark Ages is not one of those games. Doom the Dark Ages is a really great looking game, and it is a game that's actually pretty well optimized, all things considered. So as you can see, everything cranked here aside from the path tracing, and we're getting a real great performance, sitting right around 120, slight dip there just below 90 FPS. I think I thought I hit 89, our 1% low is at 82 at the current moment. But obviously, the game looks phenomenal here. The native resolution looks incredibly sharp and detailed. You could use DLAA to get an even slightly cleaner image, but honestly, TAA at 4K resolution looks really great anyways. But as you can see, while our FPS is high here at native resolution, it's not in the place where we can really, path tracing is a really demanding setting. So when we do apply that path tracing, I imagine that this will, I'm expecting it to take our FPS not necessarily into an unplayable state, but into a state that it's certainly less smooth than we're seeing here. So we're going to do the same exact run here with that path tracing turned on. And I will show some still shots as well as some, moving images to kind of show the difference, the visual difference, though I will say that there are other channels that have done a really extensive, deep dive on the setting in particular. And from my understanding and from what I've seen before actually taking a look at it myself here, is that while it does look nice, it's not necessarily like super transformative. So as you can see here, native settings, we're still, getting a solid FPS, but it's not so high that it feels like we can really come in here and change a ton. But, Doom, the other thing about Doom as a game is just, it's incredibly fast paced. So yeah, there are moments like now where maybe you clear out a room, kind of just walking around, maybe enjoying, some of the visual effects, the lighting, things like that. But even without path tracing, still looks incredibly impressive. So this will be our short little run, just kind of clearing out that room here at native resolution using no upscaling, TAA for our anti-aliasing, and on Ultra Nightmare without the path tracing. And we averaged out right around 92 FPS. So solid FPS, not 120 like we were seeing in the beginning. That's more kind of the type of performance that you'll see. Like you'll see once we kind of get outdoors a little bit. I imagine it's going to shoot back up into that 120 range like in these sorts of scenes. But really normal gameplay, you're probably going to be seeing closer to that 90 FPS. Still really good, but not a ton of wiggle room, at least at native resolution, to introduce that path tracing without some pretty serious performance decrease. So we'll see how this looks. So let's just go ahead and immediately come in here, and we're going to leave it on native for now. Of course, path tracing is nice, but I think path tracing really, you're going to want also to have some sort of upscaling more often than not. Well, we're also going to use for our denoiser, we're going to use DLSS ray reconstruction. So these are the absolute max settings you can possibly have here. And this, you see, this does actually toggle off our reflections quality now that reflections is kind of being handed off to that path tracing setting. So complete max settings here. with native resolution. And you can see, actually, interestingly enough, it does bump us automatically down to DLSS, which I don't love when games do that. But regardless, we're going to switch over to TAA because we do want to see what we can do at native here. So this is native path tracing, completely maxed everything out. So hopping in here, you can see just to begin with, we're already getting sub 60 FPS. So, you know, the 5090 is an incredibly powerful GPU. The 9800X3D and the 9950X3D are both incredibly powerful CPUs, but some settings here in games are just too far ahead of the hardware that we have. So, of course, we do have DLSS, which we will go in and look at to see what kind of performance we can get at DLSS. I will mention I'm playing on 4K here, which is really just where I kind of want to make these tests really meaningful. Though I guess I could take a look maybe in a future video or in a short or something at 1440p, but you know, those kind of differences, the resolution, we know like the general differences that resolution makes. I just want to see 4K completely maxed out. What kind of performance can we actually get on something like a 5090? And as you can see, before even any combat, we are getting probably, maybe I'm being a bit too picky, but in my opinion, this is what I would consider to be an unplayable FPS. I mean, I think 30 is playable for Doom, but really 30 on a game like Doom, like that would be like if I was playing on a Steam Deck or a handheld or something, you know. I would not want to be playing at 30 or especially not sub 30 on a desktop, let alone pretty much the most high-end possible desktop that you could possibly have here. But I will finish the run here just to kind of see what we average out before introducing a bit of that DLSS and upscaling technologies. And now will be a good time to just kind of hop in and I'll overlay and transition some direct comparisons of the actual visual difference, which to my eye right now, we'll see how those, or you guys will know before I do, taking a look at the images that I'm showing you now. But to my eye right now, it doesn't look like a super meaningful difference. I mean, you know, the images that I'll be showing, maybe, you know, when you're really keeping an eye on it, looking super carefully, might be more obvious. But just generally playing here, you know, I would certainly much rather have, you know, triple the FPS and play it native rather than that, you know, additional niceness when it comes to the lighting and things like that. But clear out the room. So where we were at a 92 FPS average, we've dropped all the way down to 36 for our average here. So yeah, pretty severe drop off here. Now, of course, the whole point of path tracing, you know, I mean, maybe not the whole point, but it's marketed very much as being used in tandem with DLSS. I don't think that NVIDIA or, you know, it or the developers, anyone thinks that, you know, this is like going to be an acceptable way to play at native resolution here. But in case you were just curious, you know, what is the 5090 capable of getting? Right around 30 or so, and you know, at times, depending on what we're seeing, there's another drop there, actually below 30, like into the 20s, which is obviously incredibly unpleasant. But yeah, I mean, path tracing, just like in Cyberpunk, you know, while it's nice, looks good, is a nice setting, but at native resolution, not really something that you are going to want to consider, in my personal opinion. So let's redo that same run, but now playing with some of our DLSS settings. So DLSS in this game looks incredible. It uses preset K by default, so no need for any sort of injecting or anything like that. Frame generation, I'll leave off for now. We're just going to go for DLSS quality, leaving our max settings on here. And as you can see, you know, quality DLSS, especially at 4K resolution, looks really great. So immediately this becomes a place that looks like we're going to be able to play at and at least get a 60 FPS average, just bumping up to, or bumping down, I should say, rather, to DLSS quality. So, you know, I'd definitely prefer playing at this setting where, you know, to my eye, and using a transform model preset K here in DLSS, looks really strong. And while our 1% low is right around 53, our frame time graph is still very flat, even with the path tracing enabled. But now we're able to come in here, play, go through these intensive scenes, and we are actually still dipping below 60 FPS slightly. It looks like at times going as low as like 53, I think I saw for a moment there. So even quality DLSS, unfortunately, looks like it's going to need a bit more help. So let's come down and just enable balanced. And now balanced at this same intensive scene does seem to hold above 60 FPS. So balance is where the game wanted to be by default. That's where it automatically changed our DLSS setting to when enabling path tracing. So it seems to kind of, figure that, yeah, okay, you're going to want 60 FPS, set it to balanced. And because we have the transformer model, the balance preset looks really strong here. I mean, I think Doom in general, across the board really, even using Intel cards with XeSS and certainly with AMD cards as well, looks really solid. It seems to be like just a game that really agrees with upscaling. It seems to retain a really strong looking image regardless of the upscaling model that you choose. So here, we are able to still get a really clean looking picture. We have all that path tracing, and now we're getting 60 FPS. Now, of course, we were getting way above this without path tracing at native resolution with no upscaling required whatsoever. But if you wanted a 60 FPS experience here, you're going to at least have to bump down to balanced or go over and use some frame generation. Now, just for fun, let's see what we can get at performance and ultra performance. So starting off here on performance. So performance here, this does look like it shoots us right above 100 FPS to begin with here. Now dropping into the 90s. This particular scene here outdoors is a bit less intensive than the indoor environment that we were in before. So just keep that in mind, but still getting, pretty strong FPS here, really smooth experience. No frame generation quite yet. I will show the frame generation. Of course, this game does offer not only frame generation, but on a 50 series card like a 5090 also offers that multi-frame generation, which gives us a lot of wiggle room as far as the settings that we want to apply to kind of trick ourselves into getting a higher FPS. So pretty strong experience here. Now, I guess the question for me would really just be, is path tracing worth it? Is it worth the performance hit? On a game like Cyberpunk, which is really, in my opinion, still, kind of the main example of path tracing being really, really effective. I would understand, the performance hit and going for that performance hit, because it does look so great in a game like Cyberpunk, where you are kind of just slowly walking through scenes. There's a ton of reflections, things like that. But a game like Doom, where you're kind of rushing through the action, doing some it's important that your aim is good, that you're kind of smooth in what's happening. Those kind of performance differences are going to be a little bit more meaningful for your actual gameplay. Cyberpunk, you can pretty much get the same real gameplay experience with a slightly lower FPS or even a little bit of input latency. So here, right around 93 at performance, I don't know. It's okay. I mean, it's definitely a solid FPS, and the picture quality does still look good with Transformer, but I don't know if it's really worth the squeeze. Now, you'll have to make that decision for yourself by looking at those side-by-sides, but, at the end of the day, it's to each their own. And just for, the sake of being thorough here, let's throw on Ultra Performance. So Ultra Performance, even on the Transform model here, is where I start to notice the image getting a little bit softer. Now, it's not terrible. It still looks good on a 4K panel, but can notice that it's being upscaled for sure. You could show me a balanced or quality upscaled image, and, even someone like me, who I really look at this stuff pretty carefully and try to, have a good eye for it, I probably would be able to be tricked a lot of times on those less aggressive upscaling. But here at Ultra Performance, I can certainly tell that, the edges of the gun, doorways, things like that, moving objects, I can tell that it just has a little bit softer of a look to it. So it doesn't look bad necessarily, but when you stop and really look at it carefully, you can notice that it's not quite as sharp as native or even a less aggressive upscaling option. So lastly here, let's play with our frame generation. So let's go back to quality here and let's enable 2x frame generation. Now, quality with 2x frame generation does now provide us with about 100 FPS. Now, frame generation here, it's only 2x, so the amount of input latency is not too terrible. It does make our video memory shoot up a pretty considerable amount, but this is a way to still get a relatively clean looking picture at just quality upscaling and a really smooth looking image, albeit, I have a bias, I think, against frame generation. In my opinion, it just is not really what I would personally want to go for, but I know people do like it. So, definitely at 4K here, frame generation and using quality upscaling is a really strong experience because, you know, you're basically getting the best of both worlds. You're getting a super clean looking image, really, you know, not aggressive upscaling whatsoever, and then getting your frames cut from a different source, being that frame generation as opposed to, you know, more aggressive upscaling. So right around 100 or so in combat, maybe dipping down slightly lower, maybe about, maybe into the mid 90s. And last setting here, let's just go for full-throated DLSS. So if you're someone who just cannot tell at all, I just want the best looking visuals, but I want the highest FPS, let's go for DLSS, ultra performance, and now 4x frame generation. And now this is where you're going to get, of course, an incredibly absurd FPS with all of those kind of tricks. And we have motion blur turned off, but there is just a bit of like smeariness. Almost feels like motion blur is still turned on in a way with all these fake frames being inserted. Now, because we are coming from a relatively high FPS just with the ultra performance upscaling anyways, the amount of input latency, in my opinion, is not very severe. It still feels like a pretty solid experience here. And honestly, if you're someone, you know, just wants a high FPS, wants the game to look pretty, and can't really tell when, you know, upscaling is applied to a certain meaningful degree, and you can't really, you know, frame generation doesn't really bother you, or maybe you even really like frame generation, prefer, you know, getting your frames from frame generation as opposed to super aggressive upscaling, or maybe you just want both. I wouldn't really, you know, bemoan anyone for wanting to play at these settings. You know, at other settings we saw like these grates on the floor. That's kind of a good scene to test. Like when you kind of walk far away, the grates off in the distance. I'll zoom in here. So on some scenes with some forms of upscaling, the grates on the floor would kind of have like this weird flickering look and kind of appears like a solid flat sheet. Here, even at ultra performance with all of this frame generation, the grates on the floor still render, you know, in a coherent manner. So this is certainly a compelling way to play the game. But anyways, that's been it, guys. I just wanted to take a quick look with the 5090, and I do want to take a look at the path tracing in this game with a few more GPUs. Specifically, what I'm really interested in is taking a look with some GPUs that are not NVIDIA GPUs to see if this is a setting that's even really going to be something that's realistically achievable for people on AMD cards. But anyways, I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next one. Bye-bye.